We are the Church of the Larger Fellowship, a Unitarian Universalist congregation with no geographical boundary, working toward creating a global spiritual community, rooted in profound love, which cultivates wonder, imagination, and the courage to act. Adapting to the COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for many bricks and mortar congregations. Early on in the pandemic, we were in a unique position to assist many congregations with the transition. We hosted special episodes of The VUU, provided advice and counseling to religious professionals, and trained congregations for live streaming worship, all while providing robust online programming for our members. From worship to covenant groups, from classes to pastoral care, and from our monthly magazine to our letter writing ministry, we have found ways to build connection and community even through the screen. We have been a model for ministry on the margins, providing services for isolated Unitarian Universalists, becoming a spiritual lifeline for our members in prison, and investing in innovative ministry. We know better than anyone how deep and meaningful connections can be formed even from a distance. Unitarian Universalists have faced many challenges in these times, and we continue to persevere and to fight for justice and equity for all people, especially during moments of crisis. We are proud to be a leader in this faith movement, and we invite you to get involved in our ministry. We strive to be a place where anyone from anywhere can find spiritual refuge anytime they need it. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are so excited to bring you an all-new episode of The VUU. The VUU is a weekly Unitarian Universalist talk show discussing important faith-based topics from an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural perspective. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, we have welcomed guests from every corner of the world. Our guests are writers, scholars, activists, and religious thought leaders who are shaping Unitarian Universalism and society for the 21st century and beyond. I hope today's show inspires you. Hope it builds your faith. Hope it gives you perspective to see the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message. Hello, I'm Aisha Hauser. Welcome to today's episode of The VUU, the weekly podcast, YouTube show sponsored by the Church of the Larger Fellowship. I am in Seattle, Washington, and I think I already said my name is Aisha Hauser. My pronouns are she, her, and it is a joy to be with you all today. We have an exciting show today, as we do every week, and some weeks they are more exciting than others. Today we have Stacey Borden, who's founder and executive director of New Beginnings Reentry Service, whose mission is to work to reduce recidivism by advocating for and providing services to women who are reentering local neighborhoods and communities. So we cannot wait to start that conversation. But first, we're going to say hello to our regulars, and we have one of our learning fellows today also joining us as host, Althea. So I'm going to send this over to Michael. Reverend.
Afternoon. Good morning. Hi, everyone. This is Michael Tino joining you from Peekskill, New York, in the beautiful Hudson Valley of New York. It's good to be with you. Don Fortune, how are you?
I am well, Michael. Thank you. I am Reverend Don Fortune. I am joining you today from South Jersey, where we have like the very last gasps of summer. It's going to be 75 today, and I'm going to try and get out and just put my toes in the grass one more time before it all freezes up. So I will thank Tanner, who's behind the scenes running tech for us today, and then I'm going to hand it over to Althea, who is our learning fellow and guest host and guest at the same time today. Good morning, Althea.
Good morning. I am so happy and proud to be here with Stacey. Stacey and I actually grew up different generations in the same place. She hangs with my sister, so I have to tell you, and she may actually be related to me. So now done all the disclaimers. Um, I am coming to you from Martha's Vineyard, believe it or not, and it's 70 degrees in October, which is not good. It means climate change is alive and well, and we shouldn't be having this. But I am so blessed to be here, and we are equally blessed to have Stacey talk about new beginnings. I have my Free Her T-shirt on, and she's going to talk a bit about abolition work. I met Stacey through FJA. Nothing about us without us is their slogan. And so we're going to hear firsthand what it's like for women who are incarcerated and who are trying to not be incarcerated. We're going to talk a little bit about abolition and why if you get a life sentence, you might be in jail for 60 years. And there are women in Massachusetts that Stacey is actively trying to help re-enter the world, get out of MCI Framingham. She might talk a little bit about COVID and how the struggles for incarcerated women have been. And she'll tell us her story. When I met Stacey, the building was almost empty, and she has single-handedly, her energy, her force has allowed this building to be almost to the point where it's about to be open with handicap accessible, meeting all of the fire department criteria, dealing with community resistance. She has shouldered all of that. And so I feel very honored to have Stacey talk to us today. Stacey, you take it away.
Do UU roundup, and then I promise, Stacey, we will come right back to you. We do have kind of in the news something happening that I want Michael to speak to, and then we will go right into our topic. So, Michael.
Well, and I think what the news is fits with the topic that we're going to be talking about too. I have had no fewer than 5 folks that I know post an article recently, and I will not give you a link to the article because it's trash. But it's an article that basically criticizes Unitarian Universalism for being the church of the woke, and uses as the basis for that criticism the fact that we own Beacon Press, and that Beacon Press has been for many, many years a vanguard of publishing socially progressive texts. And not Beacon Press has made their share of mistakes. I won't get into Beacon Press, but for many years they have tried their best to publish socially progressive texts. And this article is basically someone like put Unitarian into Wikipedia as their research on our faith, because the theology that they cite is stuck in 1819 with William Ellery Channing, who preached Unitarian Christianity 202 years ago. And our theology has evolved in the last 202 years. And if your theology has not evolved since 1819 or 1619 or 1319 or 319, there's something wrong with your faith, right? So, one of the things, the reasons why this author singled us out, and one of the reasons why this author singled out Beacon Press, is because Beacon Press published the work of Robin DiAngelo, friend of the show, but not a Unitarian Universalist, friend of many Unitarian Universalists, and lovely person. And there are lots of really valid critiques of Robin DiAngelo's work, and this author gets into exactly none of them. Because the truth is that Robin DiAngelo's idea of white fragility is based on the fact that white people will get completely bent out of shape talking about racism because our society has failed to teach people the difference between doing something wrong and being something wrong. And if you're getting completely bent out of shape about the concept of white fragility, you're just proving Robin DiAngelo's point. You're not actually critiquing her. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up today is because this difference between doing something wrong and being something wrong is a theological concept. And it relates to the work that our guest does today. It relates to the work that we do as Church of the Larger Fellowship with incarcerated Unitarian Universalists, many of whom have done something wrong in their life. But our theology, our theology claims that whatever they have done, they are still capable of receiving grace from God, from love, from humanity, and um, our society so often fails to separate out the fact that someone did something wrong with um, the fact that there is nothing inherently wrong with their being and their character. Um, so, um, so I think it really relates to the work of people, formerly incarcerated people, re-entering society and the barriers uh, that they encounter when they do that. So I wanted to talk about that because there's a theological concept here, and I think it relates. Aisha?
I appreciate that very much. And yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. Just real quick about people, the critique that I will agree with about white fragility is that Black people have been saying this for centuries.
Mhm.
That you can't talk to white people about race because they get bent out of shape. And so that's a valid critique that a white woman, who Robin's a friend of mine, she knows this critique, that has made an immense amount of money on something Black people have been saying. But the idea that the white people are pissed off that somebody's saying you're fragile is just proves the point. But I do want to, I'm going to introduce you, Stacey, and I want to name that United States, we being the United States, is a deeply punitive place. It goes right to annihilation. That is what the industrial prison complex is about, along with continuing slavery, obviously, right? And where the hope is in places like New Beginnings. And so I just want to introduce you, Stacey, and then I'll hand this over to you. Stacey is an author, performance artist, motivational speaker, and an activist. She's been on several panel discussions about criminal justice system and kind of how the prison system and mass incarceration has impacted women and families of color. And you've been a guest lecturer at the Berklee School of Music, and your story inspired students to do their final project on mass incarceration. So, Stacey, welcome to the VUU, and I just am in awe of your work and what you bring, and so welcome. And where would you like to start in letting us know how this came about? I would love to know how you started New Beginnings.
Yeah, so this is beautiful. Thank you. I'm always in awe when I'm asked to come on and speak. I just, come from a platform of, my past experiences and a dream. And so, Athea, thank you. And I believe we are connected. We're interconnected always from history, and our families are connected because of marriage. So I love you. I'm grateful to be here. In short, just to give a little synopsis of where I came from and how this all began is, coming from Roxbury as a young girl, trying to navigate through a whole bunch of dysfunction of community, of course, lack of resources that I understand now wasn't fortunate to have in our communities. And so I come from sexual and domestic violence. I am a 11th child. My mom and dad did the best they knew how to do to raise me in the dysfunctional world as well as a dysfunctional dysfunctional home. My dad was a recovering alcoholic, had his challenges, and tried to assist me the best he knew how to do. He eventually got into the court system, which was almost like he did it to try to protect me from going in the court system. And ironically, that's where I ended up, in and out of the criminal justice system, because I just couldn't navigate my trauma. That trauma took me into a world of addiction. The addiction behavior took me into the criminal justice system. And no one, not any court official, not any probation official, no, until I reached the age of 47. One judge, Judge Coffey, James Coffey, asked me, "What is wrong with you? What are you doing to yourself?" It's almost like I felt humanized for the first time in my life. Being in and out of prison 30 years, in and out, was, I can't even process. I don't even know how to explain. I don't even know how to explain how the United States can do that to women, to people. But I'm a woman. I experienced it, and I have lived with several other women in that prison system who also experienced it. And so I try to use my voice for them, not for the voiceless, because they are starting to learn how to articulate it. And we're starting to really try to change the narrative of this crime and punishment to really understand and survived in punishment. And how do we even shift that narrative to stop believing? Or we've been indoctrinated to just believe that we should punish people forever, not even understanding what they've been through in their life. And so I come on to try to really give the stories of 97% of women who are incarcerated just suffered from the same thing: sexual violence, domestic violence. We even have women in there that have caused some property damage because they didn't have their own identity. They might have busted a boyfriend's car or something, and you're giving them time for that. So when we really talk about from slavery to slavery, that's exactly what it is. No one is really focusing on the reentry process of healing, restorative justice. Even before we could even get to restorative justice, we need to really talk about transform and accountability. The system doesn't have a right to say we're going to hold you accountable without even trying to figure out who they are and what they've been through to teach us how to how to hold ourselves accountable. How do we even heal from the theory of hurt people hurt people? And so, that's part of my story. That's part of the work that I do. I had the opportunity to be woken up or be enlightened by the women, my last sentence, by the women in Framingham. Not the system, not probation, there's nothing. There was just nothing every time I got out of prison. There was nothing to help me now home to family and community. It was just always another punishing sense. Either you get put on the bracelet or you get put on probation, and then told you can't get into college because of your quarry, or you can't get into housing because of your quarry, or you can't. Everything was can't. And so one day, after Judge Coffey asked me a question of what was wrong with me and the floodgates opened up, it was almost like I understood then that the government could hold us all we want, but we're holding ourselves in a cage, in that type of prison mindset. And once we release the truth, navigation, freedom, connection, enlightenment just started happening. I went back to the prison in 2008, and I heard a lot of stuff. I heard the sisters say to me, "Stop coming through here." Angie Jefferson, who's serving a natural life sentence, who said, "Stace, you're going to get yourself into some trouble and you're never going to get out. You're going to be in here for the rest of your life." And I'm like, the rest of my life? Wait, what are you talking about? I just couldn't process. The rest of my life? She said, "Get up there to the institution and get yourself in school. Do something with yourself. Try to figure this stuff out." Lynn Sullivan, who is also who's out, working at Harvard, working at Tufts University, doing PD Green, connecting with formerly incarcerated people, get their medication. Started in the prison with Lynn said, go up there and get in VUU. Well, I only had 3 years. I didn't have 4 or 5. Unfortunately, you have to have more time to get education. Unfortunately, you have to have more time to get into treatment programs. Like, that is so unacceptable. So I got in, the sisters fought for me to get in. I started doing creative writing. I started learning that yeah, right. You have to have more time to get into programs. And we're going to get into that conversation about the shift of the system, taking human services and programming out of the prison, making it even harder, and putting in EOS, which is Executive Office of Public Safety. Now you're in public safety. Now you have more policing in a prison. No human services. And so my dream started from going up into the institution and really learning about creative writing, storytelling, looking at, maybe I have an opportunity to be employed. I got an opportunity to get into the world of law library and understanding what charges was what and how we were sentenced with the clauses of these legislative laws. It started doing, revising me vote for some of the women. And then this young woman walked in my cell and her name is Kimia Fowles. And hearing a story of Kimia Fowles, of being sexually assaulted viciously at age 12, led me into the world of this, psychology, humanistic values, what we do when we have them in the district attorney's office, and you're pressuring a young adolescent child to face an abuser when they should have took that man and got him some help and did something different. I just couldn't process that because I too was 12. I too was 18 at a rape. I too had those transgressions. People say to me all the time, well, Stacey, what do you do with people that cause harm? Well, you don't in prison put them in a cage behind the will of other males, other gods that come from paramilitary processes that aren't trained to deal with human discretions or transgressions. They're not trained to handle trauma. And then they start shifting and they use our words to say, okay, well, we're going to build a new trauma-informed prison. And we're like, what? It's like insanity in itself that you could build a trauma-informed prison. Yeah.
I wanted to, talk about a, misnomer. I am curious
it's a lot to talk about, right?
It's a lot to talk about. I mean, because it's a system designed to perpetuate harm. They're trained to give trauma, as Dawn just wrote in the chat. I mean, it is so just cruel. What I want to ask you is at what point do women get to New Beginnings? When do you, and what is like the first thing that New Beginnings offers for women wanting to, for reentry?
Well, so we've had discussions with Framingham. We want to focus on Framingham. Framingham is about to be closed down. And so that just came about with them wanting to build a new $50 million prison. We can get into that conversation too. But so we partnered with Milford office of the reentry program for women to come to us. We're not separating who done what. We don't talk about the crimes. We just talk about the women that need the services. And the services that we provide are, I'm a licensed clinician and I counsel women who have trauma and substance abuse issues, right? And so not all women have substance abuse issues, but mostly all women have come from trauma before prison, trauma during prison, and of course, traumatically come out trying to reconnect with family and community. So the first process process is really doing an intake and assessing them to meet them where they're at. What type of services do they need? We provide an array of services, which is individual counseling, group therapy, creative writing, storytelling. We have a theater. We have a stage theater being built in the basement so they can really start doing some psychodrama therapy in a theater sense. So they can target the trauma in the world of theatrical arts. We built arts around New Beginnings Reentry Services program because we believe arts heal. So we've partnered with Berkeley School of Performing Arts so students could come in and they learn about social justice or the injustices, and they can teach some creative art, music, dance, creative writing, that such. We've also partnered with Haley House so they could come in. Haley House is a community-based program that really services and helps formerly incarcerated people learn culinary arts. So we're going to do prep culinary. We've partnered with Boston Public School Systems with the children and UMass Boston students so they could come in and teach the women seasonally how to cultivate flowers and plants and vegetables. And maybe we can get a woman to open up a florist that we've had in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan. Those are the type of, things that we want to really not build a woman up, but really find purpose. It's a lot of stuff that we've offered. It's a program providing real structural, hard meaning, educational employment services. But we always say we can't get to housing and employment if your mind ain't right. You got to get your mind in order and be prepared to go in for self-sustainability. And so our program is up to 18 months. We want the woman to be okay and be connected in our community, back into the community, connected to community and family.
And I love, go ahead.
Did that answer that question?
Yes.
Yes. Stacey, what is always impressed me is to hear the women's story of how hard it is to be in places like Framingham. Framingham is I don't know if people know what Framingham is. It's the MCI Framingham. It's the maximum secure facility in Massachusetts. It was for a while the only one that existed. It's filled with lead. It's filled with asbestos. It is a health hazard. There's still people who live there amongst these health hazards who we are trying to, who Stacey and folks are trying to move out of there. It is a place where women are routinely victimized and who come in as being victimized and continue to be victimized by both the system and the COs. And the stories you hear are just quite awful. And I think Stacey is minimizing the kind of support that she's providing for folks coming into the program, coming from the prison to the program, and also the amount of advocacy that is needed to get folks extricated for MCI, because they really are in the incarceration business. They're closing down MCI, but they're trying to build this $50 million trauma-informed nonsense. So they're not really getting rid of prisons. They're just changing where they're trying to incarcerate women. And Stacey, I wonder if you say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so thank you, Athea. It just brings me back to when I got out, 2010. I ran into this woman named Andrea James, who is the founder of Families for Justice's Healing, which is a Roxbury-based program organization who does a lot of policy work, and it does and finds out all these ins and outs of these architects and the system just trying to build this $50 million prison. I've also am a national for incarcerated former Incarcerated girl, who Andrea James is also the founder of, who's doing some badass work around policy and around advocacy and really focusing on clemency and, the Free Her campaign. You cannot keep being at the table to talk about us without us. That's where the model comes. Nothing about us with us. How do you think you can just build this in Massachusetts when we have one of the locations of income in the history of the United States? We have less than 135 women in Framingham. And so there's 24 of them that's doing natural life. We can do some clemency. The governor has power to sign the paper to release these women into the community, into community-based programs. We also have women that can come up for parole. We have women who you can let out right now and bring them back home into the community. I remember this past year through COVID, Governor Baker made an awful statement about, well, we also had a commissioner who resigned for whatever reason, but they made awful statements about people incarcerated with COVID. We don't have a life sentence, death sentence. It's part of the amendment, the Constitution amendment. You don't have the death penalty in Massachusetts. And what you're doing in this realm of keeping women in a cage and not allowing them to be home with their families, they fought us against parole, medical parole. They fought us against, trying to build this in prison. They're sneaking around really talking about building $1.8 million regional jail to hold people that are suffering mentally and substance abuse. You keep trying to build these prisons to line the pockets of police and correctional officers. For what reason would you do that to a human being when you can let them be home? Let me just say this. In the history of Massachusetts of women being released out of prison, those that caused the transgression of harm in that manner, those Framingham 8 back in the 90s who was released, those women who had unconstitutional cases that had their cases from first degree to second degree that came home on parole have not ever in the history caused any more harm to any human being. So there's no reason to continue the conversation about building a new prison. There's no reason to not talk about freeing her. There's no reason for the Clemency and Pardon Board to say something to somebody like Andrew Jefferson, who comes from, a whole bunch of domestic violence background, who had great losses in her life, who tried to navigate the project and the system on her own. Someone who, had a mishap or transgression of a loss of life, and she was punished for a natural life sentence, has going on her 31st year in prison. 31st year in prison. There's no reason to not allow her to come home. 30 years is enough time for anybody to be in that type of prison that Althea described. It is septic, it's toxic, it is the oldest prison in history of the country. And to really try to give this type of narrative that these architects can build a trauma-informed, they're architects, they build buildings. They're not in the minds of people. They can't say they can build a trauma-informed. Who's the expert here? We are. We serve time in those prisons. We serve time behind those 5x8 cages. We were the ones across the country. We know the Department of Justice have shown how much trauma and demeaning and, sexual assaults is happening in these prisons across the country. It just happened on the news that they're talking about New Jersey jail for women. They're talking about Lowell prison down in Florida, that they're dragging women out of the prison and having them service male guards. How much documentation are really going to come out of these prisons? When are we going to really talk about what's happening? And how about we can bring them home, because these families, these individuals have families that they're connected to. It's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of budgets, police budgets. involved? Who are we policing here? We're policing Black and brown communities. We can get into that conversation too. What about the correctional association budget? You almost have one correctional officer to an individual in prison. This is all unacceptable. Who is going to start shifting into a healing center, into really creating the type of reentry homes, healing homes, community-based programs for people, or preventive and diversion measures before they even get to that level of causing harm? When are we going to have those conversations?
I mean, to me, the whole notion of trauma-informed prison is so absurd on its very face. I mean, if you start with the philosophy that people need to be punished, then you're not trauma informed, right?
Right.
You've left the realm of trauma informed anything.
Right.
If what you're doing is based on a philosophy that people need to be punished and not understood and cared for and healed and made whole. And so I so appreciate that you're looking at this whole system.
And I also really want to lift up how beautiful it is that your program.
I mean, it's pretty hard.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, it's about thriving, not just surviving. That there's drama and flowers and art when women come out. It's not just about you need to learn something to produce. It's about learn to live, and that's part of healing is thriving. And I that's just so beautiful. And yeah, I agree, Michael. Once we start with punishment, and yeah, you're already not trauma informed. So go ahead, Stacey, or whoever. Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say punishment is a capitalist way of viewing pain.
Yes.
Like pain can be counted as this many units of something, and therefore somebody must pay back. Right? That's how we understand this perversion that we call a justice system. It's about and policing in this continent has always been about protecting property. It has always been about protecting property. And it's always been about money, and it's always been about resources. And if we can find a way to get away from trying to put numbers on pain and address the pain without having to put it on a scale of 1 to 10. Let's just say it hurts, and let's talk about that. And what can we do to make it not hurt? Not what can we do to make somebody else hurt as bad, because that's the dumbest thing since ever, right? But yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm like the last person who should be talking here today. I am the whitest person in the world, and I grew up on the North Shore of Massachusetts. And I know Framingham, and it was the thing you got threatened with when you were a bad little kid, growing up in Massachusetts, and yeah, there, but for the grace of God,
May I say one thing?
Please.
We also need to understand this is This is multi-generational trauma. These are mothers that are in MCI Framingham.
Yep.
They've been snatched away from their children. So there's children now having to deal with mothers incarcerated. In addition, there are these barriers for their children to see their mothers. This whole idea of being able to make a telephone call and receive a telephone call as a parent. It is, having had a son was incarcerated, if you don't have a credit card, if you can't call collect, there are so many barriers to just stay in contact with a relative who is incarcerated. And if it's your mama, and you can't talk to your mama on a regular, we're talking about multi-generational trauma.
That's right. I just want to touch on something I'm sure some of the audience members are probably saying, the victims. Let's talk about victims, victimizers. Let's really place this thing, because we don't want to negate the fact that there has been harm caused, right? I mean, Afia said it about historical generational trauma. One of the things that we don't really talk about and wonder why so much harm is being caused. We have to look at it so differently. When I think about, the women that have had so much trauma and harm caused to them, that in turn, mentally, sometimes you just kind of check out. I have a lot of clients. I even counsel men that are preparing for parole hearings. We need to really start thinking about, how do we shift them to understand accountability? How do we really even get them to see that, life was taken? There are families out there that are hurting because they had a great loss. Well, not only am I a victim of abuse, but I'm also a victim as someone who had a loss, right? And so my nephew was taken from us. I can't imagine what my sister goes through. But when I think about that loss, and then me being a victim, I could have taken a life, from me being a victim and became a victimizer. When I think about the person that caused harm to my nephew, I don't think him or her in a they should be in a cage. I think, what happened to this individual that could even fathom taking and doing that to cause that one that he had, he had a he had a life. And so when I think of that way, and I have these type of conversations, I have to bring that into the space to say we're all victims. We've all been victimized. Hurt people. And when we can really look at it in that sense, to even ask the question, what would make someone do that? That's a part of the work of restorative justice. But more so, the work I do with the men and women when they're ready for parole, we don't want to just say I'm sorry or say I'm remorseful. We want to know that there's a part of the brain that was undernourished, underdeveloped. And by the time you go into these prisons at 17, 16, maybe 19, maybe 27. For me, I didn't mature until I was 47. So I was 47. Some mature faster than others. Some don't mature until they're 60 or 70. Some never mature. But the point of the matter is, by the time you're almost 40, 50, is when you start to stand. What the hell did I do? Why the hell am I in here? What is going on with this type of system for decades? That's how we believe that we should be talking about punishment. People hurt. And the first thing we think of, they should be in jail for the rest of their life so they could get harm done to them. No, we should really think different. We should first think empathetic values. That empathy. Think about maybe that person didn't have the nurturing. Maybe they were neglected. Maybe their parent didn't know any better. Maybe their parent were hurt too. There's not a book out here that says, when you really think about the world of psychology and you think about a person who was only child, or a person that had a different position and sibling position, a person who, a parent born the first child and they didn't have no experience because they never parented before. And then the second one comes out, you get a little more experience. Then the third one comes out. Now the first one feels like totally neglected and some disorders starting there. Who knows what happened in someone's household? That's how we should be thinking. Empathy. I wonder what happened in that person's life. especially with the power of the criminal justice system. We need to start shifting and talk about racial disparities, even when we're in the court. Every time I was in court, it was all white people. Nobody was there to represent me. You know, and I hear you say, you know, you're a white person. There's a whole bunch of white people now being imprisoned. The whole epidemic of opioid epidemic is starting to hit communities like never before. Now, how do we do that? How do we start shifting that narrative? How do we really say, okay, these communities are starting to be affected? Are we going to start making money off of that too? How do we really stop this progress of building these systems and taking away from community education, Boston Public Schools? How do we shift and divest some of those funds, put it into treatment, put it into education? We know educational services allow people to thrive. We know that. So why aren't we divesting some of these budget funds and investing them into community-based educational? We need museums in our communities. I didn't know anything about our history. I had to go all the way to Alabama to see Brian Stevenson's Liberty Museum to understand what the hell happened from slavery to slavery. Why can't it be right here in our community to teach the next generation? So you don't have to build this new prison, because that's what you're building it for. I mean, there's so many topics around this. We need to free our sisters out of these cages. We need to start freeing people.
We need to get rid of cages. We need to stop caging humans. It is abhorrent, and there is no justification other than the founding of this nation being predicated on violent extractive capitalism. And that's what needs to change. The center of the United States and what operates it, including our government, is money and the pursuit of power and remaining in power and subjugating Black and brown people. And it is, I mean, we're caging children. And so we need to get rid of cages. I couldn't agree with you more.
More community-based programs almost on every other block in our community. One of them could be a day program. The other one could be 24 hours for people in distress. We don't have anything like that in our community. And I'm really surprised that some of our elected officials that aren't thinking quite clear. Even our Attorney General said it's okay to cage people of that homeless sector down Mass and Cass. We should be caging them in an immigration detention. Well, if you let go of the immigration detention because it was not right and unjust, then why do you think it's okay to house these distressed, unhoused people? This is their home. You allowed it to get that big because you stopped treatment services. And
That's
so now
right.
you want to cage them again?
That's right. That's right.
Civil rights?
That's right.
You
That's
want
right.
to put them in cages? And
That's
some
right.
of them don't know how to be on. Some
That's
are
right.
hurting. Some of them come from so much trauma they don't even know how to live. And they feel safe on the street because you failed them. And now you want to house them in South Bay Detention Center off of Sheriff Pumpkin's great idea. Really?
Well,
That's
and so
a whole bunch more money. $100,000 per person that you want to house them in when you could give them the treatment and housing that they need and deserve.
Right.
and so
That's a whole nother topic
trauma-informed
we're
social
talking about, man.
services.
Like it's unbelievable that we can sit here and get it, but they can't get it.
So trauma-informed social services has to address
You know, and
the trauma.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And it has to stop more trauma from happening.
That's right.
Yeah.
And imagine the correctional offices. Imagine the correctional facility. These correctional offices are also traumatized.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. If you're putting people in a cage, you're dragging people out of a cage, you're putting them in a strap here like they're going to an electric chair or something, muzzling mouths, beating people down, sexual assaulting women. Those are traumatic in itself for them. Now imagine what they're doing to their communities, their families, their children.
That's right. That's right.
Well, how are we? It's still perpetuating the idea of trauma.
if you have
Like,
been
would you
taught,
give them some trauma-informed care, some CANS treatment. It's called Children, Adolescents, Needs, and Strengths. Give them the idea and educate them to bring them in community-based programs and give them the same salary that they're paying to be abusive in a prison.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
See, I think
Mhm.
what also gets lost is how spiritually beat up these folks are. I mean,
yeah,
in jail, Massachusetts is a big place in Massachusetts. I don't know. They used to call it methadone mile, but since people are not getting treatment anymore, it's not methadone mile, but it's a place where
So disrespectful.
yeah, it's a place
Mm.
where um, um, folks who have substance abuse issues end up hanging out, because I think there's safety in numbers. They know how to live on the street. They know how to survive a lot of things. And so there's been lots of efforts to, this is just parenthetically, a correctional officer stopped in the middle of one of these groups and started mouthing off on them and got beat up. And then they went down and they beat up the folks who were there because he did something that was just dumb. I mean, he stopped in the middle of a crowd and got out of his car. He was in a car, got out of his car, started mouthing off. He got beat up, and then it got the next day. They did this massive sweep, if you will. It's excuse me. It's all punitive.
Yeah.
There's not a
Mm.
place of health. When we talk
Mm.
about incarceration, people
Yeah.
don't look back and look at where can we be helpful and where can it be healthy, and how spiritually we have just destroyed folks. It's very difficult. It's very difficult.
I remember a time in Massachusetts when Danvers meant something, right? Danvers was the house on the hill. Danvers was the large state-run mental institution. And I knew people from meetings in the North Shore area who told many horrifying stories about waking up in Danvers, which was a state-run detox. And I remember when they shut that down and made it into really fancy, super expensive condos, right? That you can see from
of course.
95 now. Like, first off, I wouldn't like, there've got to be, that place was run like something out of a Dickensian nightmare. Okay. But it was a place where the poorest of the poor could go and detox safely. And then be pointed toward a halfway house or meetings or stuff, right? It was not great, but it was a little bit, and it was certainly more than they've got now. You know, I mean, now they've got, like you say, they've got fancy offices that have cost millions of dollars, but they don't do anything. They don't. They push papers around, and they justify their existence to other people who push papers around, but I don't see them actually helping the huddled masses that we claim to be the least of ours, that are our responsibility. So I could chew on that for a while longer.
Well, the problem is the lack of empathy in the United States. Like, just there's no money to be had in empathy, and that's just beyond horrific and tragic. And that's been true since, again, the founding of this nation. So it's we need. I always think about James Baldwin saying that white people are not connected to themselves, and that is what enables the cruelty, that abject cruelty that has happened for centuries in this country. I mean, all over the world, thanks to colonialism, and it is specifically horrific, the continuation here, which is depressing.
Well, it's the old thing about we have abolished slavery, except for people who are in jail.
Yeah, you know, that area has that whole area down there is just heartbreaking when I think of it as me being a clinician, trying to provide, substance abuse services. When you think about it, we have, when Althea said it used to be called methadone mile, it was so disrespectful and demeaning. It was suggested that methadone doesn't work. Methadone surely works. Not all these type of programmers are going to have the right people. We're always going to learn something, to change. But I mean, it works. It works with the right people, with the right counseling, with, you put somebody on the right milligram, and you start counseling them to get them away from the old way of life, a new way of life, and you start weaning them off. But to put it in that perspective, you have the shelters, you have the jail, you have the medical facility, Boston Medical. You have that whole area that they're going over, some taking the methadone and then going over to Boston Medical, dealing with their primary care doctors, getting prescription for psych meds. I think that's unacceptable. I think it should be put where it needs to be, in the mental health bracket, into the psych medication. No one should have the authority to prescribe somebody on methadone a Klonopin. As to what you're seeing down there, but everybody walking around really sedated, getting hit by cars, not even realizing you're walking into traffic, all that stuff. Who is regulating the area? Who, these ideas to think that we should just take their tents away. Some people have so much trauma that is their home. That is their ability. Some people don't know how to, again, the idea to think that they should build more houses and put them in. Some people wouldn't know how to navigate paying their rent. They're in their trauma. We need some healing spaces. We need them to be in a treatment setting. Give them an idea. Really, we need to think about shifting and putting pressure on the federal government to allow them to open up safe injection sites. It works. Look at the history. Look at some data. Some things we just need to try. But sending them into the cages is not the solution. We don't have any type of thought process. You don't have any of us at the table. You don't have any of the unhoused people at the table. You don't have any formerly incarcerated people at the table. You don't have anybody who had addictive behaviors at the table. You don't have any religious sect. You don't have anything at the table but system people who think they know what to do. And they because they didn't have the direct experience. And almost all of us, if not admitting, almost all of us have indirect experience with family members that are suffering with mental illness, suffering with alcoholism and addictive behaviors, suffering with incarceration, suffering with a lot of trauma. And all you want to do is medicate and get your way out of it. And even that in itself is a whole nother discussion when we talk about pharmaceutical meds. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of discussions that we need to have, but more so we need to start humanizing individuals.
Yes. Stacey, we sure do. And we will have you back because we have about 3 more hours of show that we need to have to cover everything. Deep gratitude to you and the work you're doing. Trying to bring compassion and empathy to our just hurting, painful society. Thank you, Althea, for being with us today. Michael, Dawn, next week on The VUU, we're going to have folks back from the UU Ministry for Earth, and they will be talking about programs they're running, especially with BIPOC youth and young adults. Thank you, Stacey, so much. We appreciate you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all. Be well, folks.